utilising knowledge in this way, it opens up tremendous vistas of possibilities, and we start to understand what it means to be a knowledge producer economy. It means we're creating these knowledge graphs, and we're doing it automatically, and then we're giving these knowledge graphs to machines so they can run our economies. And so this is a tremendous paradigm shift. An important one is the move from correlational knowledge, where we're looking at relationships like revenue minus costs equal profit, which is a very shallow way of understanding the world. And we're moving to a much deeper way of understanding the world, where we get paradigm changes such as the idea that we must invest in order to improve our profit. We must increase our costs in order to increase our profit. So now let's look even more deeply at this idea of profit or value, because here too we can make paradigm shifts, paradigm changes. The first step is to understand that all of this knowledge can be represented symbolically and can then be monetized. So imagine we've got a knowledge object that can create new flu vaccines, we've got a knowledge object that can do profit optimization, and then we've got another one that can produce clean energy, gene mapping, climate control, any function, any application in any area of science. It can be quantum computing, it can be, and then we can access these knowledge objects and use them to drive our economies or our factories. And so if we're a knowledge producer, we can charge for use of these knowledge objects and we can price them. And you'll see that there can then be a menu of pricing, and this is the way we transact. So this is the economics of a knowledge economy, looks like this. Now, there's still a place for entrepreneurs at every level in the stack. So what we can do is we can take these knowledge objects and combine them. And so we can create new meta objects from the individual components. And so if we've got a mission, for example, if we want to put a colony on Mars, then we go and get a knowledge object that's going to build us a rocket, and another one that can grow food in low hydro environments, and another one that builds spacesuits, and we put them all together, and in this way we can construct the capability to colonize Mars. And Elon Musk, as we know, is doing that very kind of thing. And of course, then we get knowledge magnification, and that leads to value magnification and price magnification. So now picture the idea that we've got digital objects which are able to generate this kind of economic value. And it costs something to build these objects, which requires investments. And we can think about those investments the same way as we think about investment in an equity stock. And so this leads us to new ways of thinking about knowledge investment. We're able to offer shares in knowledge object production on the share market. We can trade them. We've seen that the returns of knowledge objects can be treated like dividends. And what we're looking at is really the next generation of digital object. So we went through a stage where digital objects were used to just record transactions that happen in the real world. Then we had the idea of cryptocurrencies, and they were tradable for objects in the real world. But now for the first time, we've got the idea that we've got a digital object that has inherent value in its own right. So for the first time, knowledge itself is monetizable. There's concrete value. And so this can be traded. And so in fact, there will be a new knowledge economy based on this very idea, the value of which is going to exceed the value of the physical economy. And so when we look to stock markets of the future and trading regimes of the future, we'll be seeing that most of that activity will be taking place in the digital realm. And this is why it's so important to become a knowledge economy and to understand the economics of that domain. So what we see will emerge is an international trade in knowledge. And we'll see that there will be some producers which are very prolific and others which don't make the grade, who are only knowledge consumers in this economy, and of course they'll be at a tremendous disadvantage. And so here we can see why it's necessary to be a fast mover in this space in order to capture the opportunities that the knowledge economy represents. Now, once The traditional way to deal with any kind of new knowledge translation, new knowledge creation or new value creation, the instinctive response from institutions is usually to move in and offer their services as a regulator, because that's what institutions do. They regulate, so the only question in their mind is, well, what regulation applies here? And I would caution regulators against moving into this space in a way that slows down the development of these economies. Because as soon as there's a move to limit artificial intelligence in any way, these knowledge objects, the production and the operation of these new knowledge objects will simply migrate outside of the zone of regulatory control. And so there's no point in regulating something if it's just going to move outside your jurisdiction. And so be very careful when considering new regulatory programs that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and regulate something which disappears. Rather, think first, how do we create a productive environment for these knowledge economies to proliferate inside our jurisdiction, and only consider later what kind of regulation might be required. So for example, if we prematurely put taxes on artificial intelligence, then all that will mean is the artificial intelligence will move to the lower tax jurisdiction. Because unlike labour, which can't just disappear, or unlike corporations, which are incorporated inside your jurisdiction, there are no constraints on the migration of knowledge. And so it's very easy for them to slip off to Mauritius or Cayman Islands or Africa, where they're outside tax control. An even worse idea is to then think, well, if the knowledge wasn't produced inside our economy, we'll create tariffs to keep it out. Because what this does is it insulates your economy from learning. We don't want to keep knowledge out of our economies. Instead, we want it flourishing inside. The other thing to consider is that when we look at the patent environment, we'll see that there's going to be an international arms race for patenting all the new knowledge that's created. And we certainly don't want that happening outside our jurisdictions. And creating environments where, because there's an early adopter that's very prolific in creating knowledge in an area such as health, that now there's no room for us to grow because the whole space has been patented. So this is very much a risk that's a clear and present danger to the development of knowledge economies everywhere. So what I'd recommend is that instead we create free knowledge zones. So I should spend some time to elaborate what I mean exactly by a free knowledge zone, because we don't want to misunderstand this term. I certainly don't mean to say that companies don't have an interest in protecting their intellectual property. They certainly do. So if you've done the research to create some new knowledge, you're absolutely entitled to keep that a trade secret and to then be competitive in your economy using the knowledge you've generated. What we don't want to see are areas like medicine where somebody's able to move into, say, the pharmaceutical space with a new drug concept, and once the first to create the knowledge has filed a patent, they've locked everybody else out. So it's one thing to protect your own knowledge, it's quite another thing to stop somebody else following in your footsteps. So what I'd recommend is that we have zones of freedom where there are no restrictions on generating knowledge from your own work, from your own effort. And this is the way to ensure competitiveness in places like pharmaceuticals, but medicine and every other realm. And so there's a paradigm shift required here from the idea that knowledge producers must file patents, and then they've got a lock on that patent for the next 20 years or whatever time they're able to negotiate. Rather, we want to give the freedom for anyone to trade in knowledge. Now, this might mean that we designate particular areas, such as those concerned with poverty alleviation or natural disaster recovery or medicine, where we remove the ability of companies to restrict knowledge creation. So these kind of issues immediately raise the question of ethics, because we say, well, what is the ethical way forward? Is it ethical to produce somebody else, to prevent somebody else from producing medical knowledge? Is it ethical to stop somebody using their own intelligence to interpret the world they live in, to get a better understanding of truth that allows them to create a better future for themselves? Is it ethical to prevent that? And so many other questions. And the responses that I see when I go to artificial intelligence conferences are quite predictable, and let's look at what some of those are. It's certainly become a very hot topic in the space. So